Because of some new factors in technology, demographics, and the global economy, we're moving into a new period in human history where profound changes to the way that we orchestrate capability to create goods and services in society, to innovate, to govern ourselves, to learn, are now, that profound changes in these are now possible. And there are a number of drivers that are coming together to create this situation. The first is the so-called new web, or the Web 2.0. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, as the CEO of Engineera, based in Texas, might say, this ain't your daddy's internet. Okay? The old web was a platform for the presentation of content. It was based on the standard called HTML, and HTML was a platform for the presentation of content, which is why during the dot-com period, everybody talked about websites and eyeballs and stickiness and page views, because that's what the internet was, a platform for the presentation of content. Do you remember the expression, content is king? Well, we now have a new web, and it's based on something called XML. And it's no longer a platform for presentation, it's a platform for computation. Thank you. We access it through the thing, billions, soon trillions of inert objects that become smart communicating devices. I have a friend in Toronto, everything in his house that has electrical power has an IP address. That means it's connected to the internet. And all this stuff talks to itself. He was bragging that his toaster talks to his refrigerator. And I said, well, you know, why would you care? The one that he was biggest on was his fence talks to his sprinkler. And I said, well, what does that do? And he says, well, if a burglar comes over the fence, the sprinkler is my first line of defense. So this is pervasive ambient computing. The internet is becoming a big computer. And every time you go onto the internet and you do something, you tag a photo on Facebook or Flickr, you are programming this global computer. So we now have a global computational platform that enables people to collaborate. And that's a big change from the web of the dot-com period. Next slide, please. So the second big driver is a profound demographic revolution that's underway. Next slide, please. We have the first generation to grow up digital, and these kids are different. I started studying young people as a generation about 15 years ago when I noticed how my own children were effortlessly able to use all this sophisticated technology. At first I thought, my children are prodigies. But then I noticed that all their friends were like them, so that was a bad theory. So I began working with 300 young people, and I wrote this book a dozen years ago. Next, please. Flash forward 12 years, this generation is not just growing up digital, they've grown up digital, and they're different. This is a generation that as they come into the workforce, the marketplace, society, as they become citizens, there's no more powerful force to change every institution. These institutions that are now unfrozen because of this current crisis. Exhibit A, they just elected their first president of the United States. And that's not my point of view only, that's the president's point of view as well. Next, please. So this is the first generation to be bathed in bits. Computers, the internet, interactive technologies are part of the experience of youth. And time online is not taken away from hanging out with your friends, learning the piano, talking to your parents, or doing your homework. Time online for this generation is taken away from television. The baby boomers in the US, my generation, when we were growing up, we watched 24 hours a week of TV per kid. These kids watch less TV and they watch it differently. They come home and they turn on their computer and they're in 3 different windows and they're talking on the phone and then they got an MP3 file going and 3 magazines open and they're playing a video game on the side. Oh yeah, and they're doing their homework and the television may be going on in the background. But the TV has become ambient media. It's sort of like Muzak. And when they're online, what are they doing? Well, rather than being the passive recipients of video, They're reading and thinking and organizing and authenticating and composing their thoughts and searching for things and scrutinizing and having to remember things. Even with video games, they're developing strategies. With proper balance, and most kids have that, this is something that's affecting brain development in an enormously positive way. And I conducted a $4 million research project on this topic, and I say that with some authority. So we can talk about that, the discussion, if you want. But something like multitasking. How can your 14-year-old be doing 6 things at once and she still gets an A, or gets A's? Well, she's not doing 6 things at once. She has better active working memory, and she has better switching abilities. How you spend your time after your DNA is the #1 determinant of what your brain is like. And if you spend your time watching 24 hours a week of television, you get a certain kind of brain. If you spend your time being the active handler of information, you get a different kind of brain. I'm talking about the building of the brain, the deep structures and synaptic connections of the brain. Next, please. Further, this is the first time in human history when young people are an authority about something really important. When I was 11, I was an authority on model trains. Today, the 11-year-old at the breakfast table is an authority on the digital revolution that's changing business, commerce, government, learning, publishing, every institution in society. In the 60s, we had a generation gap. Big differences between kids and parents over values and lifestyle and ideology and so on. That doesn't exist so much today. Kids and parents get along pretty well. Look at your iPod and your kid's iPod. There's overlap. My parents didn't even like the Beatles, let alone the Stones or the Doors. I mean, what we have today, next please, is what I call a generation lap, where kids are lapping their parents on the info track. And if you have a teenager in your house, you know what I'm talking about. This changes authority in the family. The only time we've come close to this is with immigrant kids who knew the local language, but it's never happened as a generalized phenomenon. What does it mean for the kids to know more about the biggest innovation in learning ever than their teachers? To know more about the most powerful tools ever for wealth creation and innovation than their managers as they come into the workforce? Next, please. So that's a big force for change. Next one, put those two together and you get a social revolution. Next. I could show you 30 charts and they all look the same, so I won't. But they all show the old HTML website in red being eclipsed by the XML-based community in blue. The old one thought the internet is about the presentation of content. The new one understands the web is about creating a platform whereby people can self-organize and create vibrant communities. Next, please. So YouTube beats MTV, and Facebook beats Match.com. And next, please. And Wikipedia is a huge problem for Britannica. Next, please. So what's going on here? Well, I'll tell you a quick story. It was 2 years ago, and I gave my son, Alex, who was 20 at the time, for Christmas, I gave him an advanced copy of Wikinomics. The book had just come out. I gave him other things, too, okay? But, and he said, thanks, Dad. He went off, he started reading the book. He came back a couple hours later. He said, hey, Dad, this is a good book. It's like he's surprised or something. He said, I think I'll create a community on Facebook. I said, do you mind if I watch? 15 minutes later, he's created the Wikinomics community. 15 minutes after that, he has 6 members. By the time we're eating turkey on Christmas night, he has 130 members in 7 countries, 7 regional coordinators for the community. He has a president, a secretary, and a chief information officer. He sent out a PDF of the first 2 chapters of the book. I'm the big authority, right? Before I'm eating turkey, I got kids writing back in saying, Mr. Tapscott, we found problems with your book. And the community is placing demands on me. One kid writes in and says, how exactly is Mr. Tapscott going to be contributing to our community? It's like, what is this? 2 words, self-organization. Self-organization has been around throughout human history. Language was a function of self-organization. There was no central committee of the English language that said this will be called a glass. It just kind of happened. But what used to take place over millennia or years can now happen over months or on a single Christmas day. I never could have created a community of 130 people in 7 countries when I was 20, regardless of what I did. Next. So You put those together and you get an economic revolution that gets to the point that I want to make. Next, please. Throughout the 20th century, we created wealth through traditional vertically integrated and command and control organizations that did everything from soup to nuts. And a Nobel Prize-winning economist named Ronald Coase, 70 years ago, he was based in London, wrote a deceptively simple paper. And he asked the question, why does the firm exist? If Adam Smith is right, the open market's the best mechanism to determine how goods and resources and information are allocated in an economy, why isn't everybody an independent contractor at every step along the way in production? And he said the answer is collaboration costs. The cost of search, he said, 70 years ago, in an open market of finding all the right people to do something, prohibitive. The cost of coordination, of contracting. Next, please. So Henry Ford had within the boundaries of the Ford Motor Company a power plant, shipping company, steel mill, because the costs of collaboration in an open market were greater than the cost of doing things inside the boundaries of corporations. Then along came information technology, and the boundaries of corporations became more porous. A couple of decades ago in a book called Paradigm Shift, I described it as the extended enterprise. Next. Then we had the rise of the internet, and vertically integrated companies began to unbundle further into focus companies that work within networks, business webs. Cisco understood this. They succeeded. Their competitors did not and fell behind. Next. And now collaboration costs are dropping to the point where peers can come together and create value. So if you can create an encyclopedia with 1 million people that's 10 times bigger than Britannica, I wouldn't use it as a reference because it's constantly changing, but overall the quality is pretty good by most of the studies that have been done. Nature magazine said the error rate in science is comparable to Britannica. Then what else could you create? Could you create an operating system for computers? Well, the Linux operating system is owned by nobody, created by a bunch of volunteers. It's the dominant operating system for medium and large computers. And it has some big customers like China. Could you create a bank? Yes, last night with a group of bankers, one of them said to me the most interesting thing that he has going on at this meeting, a dinner meeting we were having, was a thing called Zopa. It's peer-to-peer banking. You can't get a loan from a bank these days, so people are now self-organizing to create essentially a peer-to-peer bank. So this is a new age of participation where people can now participate in the economy in ways that are unthinkable. You can not only read the encyclopedia, you can write it. You can not only watch the evening news, you can go onto current TV, create a news clip, and half of all of their content is user-generated. You can save lives in a crisis. During Katrina, the authorities responded badly, so people self-organized. On Google Maps, women in second floor of house, water 8 feet and rising. She's in a wheelchair, 2:22 p.m. lives were saved. What an exciting time in human history. Next, please. So to try and pull this together for you, here's an example. It's a company called Goldcorp. The reason I know this guy, his name is Rob McEwen, he's my neighbor. And he took over a gold mining company, and his geologist couldn't tell him where the gold was. And after a few years, he was so frustrated, he couldn't go into production. He was ready to shut the thing down. But he had an epiphany one day. He wondered, if my geologists don't know where the gold is, maybe somebody else does. So he did a radical thing. He published his intellectual property, the biggest secret in the mining industry, your geological data. And he held a contest called the Goldcorp Challenge. $500,000 in prizes for anybody who can tell me, do I have any gold? And if so, where is it? He got submissions from all around the world, 77 of them. They used techniques that he'd never heard of. And for his $500,000 in prize money, he found $3.4 billion worth of gold. And the market value of his company went from $90 million to $10 billion. And I can tell you, because he's my neighbor, he's a happy camper. So next, please. So he embraced some new principles that I think that now that we have this crisis, we need to bake into all of our institutions. Peering. Conventional wisdom is that talent is inside your boundaries. He should have fired his head of geology, right? Because he was the authority. No, he didn't. He peered. He said, I wonder who their peers are. Some of the best submissions didn't come from geologists. They came from computer scientists, engineers. He had chemists giving organic solutions to this problem. The winner was a computer graphics company that built a three-dimensional model of the mine. He was open and transparent. He stood up in front of the world and he said, I'm the CEO of this gold company, and I don't know if we have any gold. He shared his intellectual property. Isn't that socialism? No. It turns out you need a portfolio of IP, some that you own and protect, and others that you may place in the commons, and that's the way to compete. And he didn't think global and act local. He acted globally. He viewed the world as his geology department. Next, please. So to bring this home to the current crisis, this is a real mess. And if we don't fix this thing, this is not about unhappy people and governments falling. This is the stuff of serious discord and possibly of revolution. Our traditional authorities and oligarchies of knowledge failed us, and our traditional models failed. Let's apply this thinking to the financial market. What ought to be done? Next, please. Well, let's apply these principles. Peering. Why don't we have a G20 of the leaders of the financial industry to get together to find a peer solution to this problem rather than the financial industry just being the recipients or the victims of regulation? Next, we have transparency. A big problem with the whole crisis is that there was opacity baked into all of our models. These CDOs, collateralized debt obligations, investors had no idea what they were buying. They should be able to fly into them and drill down and know what's happening. Next, we should share our intellectual property. Risk management should be placed in the commons. We need a Linux or a human genome of risk management. Oh, but our proprietary risk models and data and algorithms are the foundation of our competitive advantage. Hello? They didn't work very well, did they? They not only did not confer competitive advantage, they led to the downfall of the entire industry. Next. And obviously, you can't act local. Domestic regulation, for example, is completely insufficient. We now have a global market. So, next, to close, next, please. 4 principles, 4 big drivers. Next, please. This is creating a perfect storm, and it's a time of great peril and danger. Next, but it's a time of great opportunity. One final thought. This is a new paradigm, the way that I'm describing this. Fundamental changes to all of our institutions, driven by a new set of principles where we bake integrity into the DNA of all of our organizations. And you get something like that, it's a new paradigm. You get a crisis of leadership, vested interests fight against change, and leaders of the old are often the last to embrace the new. How are our companies, how are our governments going to find leadership for change? My big insight is that in studying thousands of organizations, leadership can come from anywhere. And that means it's each of our personal opportunity. We can now all participate in the economy and in society in ways that were unthinkable. And there is wisdom out there in the crowd.